When I opened my garage that morning, I expected to see the same empty space I'd seen every day for years. Maybe my old tools, maybe a couple of boxes stacked in the corner. Instead, I found a shiny black SUV parked dead center like it owned the place. And sitting on a lawn chair right outside was a woman in leopard print leggings sipping boxed wine like it was a summer vacation. 3 of my neighbors stood across the street filming like they'd just stumbled onto a live episode of Neighborhood Nightmares. That's when I realized my Thursday had just been hijacked by insanity. I froze at the door trying to process what I was seeing. This woman, this stranger swiveled in her chair, waved lazily and said, "Don't worry, honey. I'm just borrowing your garage till the HOA approves my carport permit." I blinked, wondering if maybe I'd misheard. Maybe she was joking. She wasn't. She tossed her empty cup to the ground, smiled like I was the intruder, and added, "You weren't using it anyway, right?" That was the moment my pulse went from calm to code red. I told her flat out that she needed to move her car now, or I'd call the cops. She laughed like I'd just said something adorable and pulled out a piece of paper that looked suspiciously like it had been made in Google Docs. Across the top, highlighted in pink, were the words, "Temporary parking rights for Karen Thompson." It even had her own name as a signature. I wish I were joking. She started explaining how community mothers deserved priority parking, how as a decent neighbor I should be fine letting her use my garage for a few days. Every time I tried to explain that this was in fact my private property, she'd talk louder. At one point she even called me selfish. The crowd across the street started whispering, phones up, recording every second. And I don't know what it was, rage, disbelief, or just pure spite, but something in me snapped. I stopped arguing. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "You know what? Keep it." Her smirk widened. She thought she'd won, until I pressed the garage button, watched the door close, turned the lock from the inside, and walked straight past her to my car. I tossed my weekend bag in the trunk, waved, and said, "Good luck getting it out." 2 hours later, I was on a flight to Cancun. You'd think that would have been the end of it, but no, that was only the beginning. Somewhere between the first margarita and the ocean view, my phone started blowing up. My neighbors were sending updates like it was live news coverage. Apparently, Karen had called 3 locksmiths, all refused to break into my garage. She called the cops twice, and both times they told her she had no legal right to my property. Then she tried to pry open the window with a crowbar while screaming about emotional distress. Someone filmed that too. It went viral within hours. At first I just laughed, but the more I watched, the more I realized I didn't want this to end with her just looking stupid. I wanted her to learn something. And that's when the idea hit me. If she wanted my garage so badly, she could keep it, permanently. I spent the next few days in Cancun making calls. Contractors, fence builders, legal consultants. When one contractor asked, "So, you want to build a fence around your garage?" Trapping her car inside, I said, "Exactly." He paused, then chuckled. "You know what, man, I like your style." Meanwhile, back home, Karen was unraveling. She sat in my driveway like a vigil widow crying about her stolen SUV. She made fake legal notices and taped them to my door. The HOA tried to mediate, but even they couldn't handle her drama. One neighbor texted me, "Dude, she printed flyers saying you committed vehicle hostage crimes." By the time I flew back home, the entire neighborhood was waiting like it was the season finale of a reality show. As soon as I stepped out of my cab, Karen came marching up, holding a manila folder full of crayon-colored legal documents. She started screaming about how she'd been wronged, how her parking rights had been violated. I let her finish, looked her straight in the eye, and said, "Not today, Karen." Then I turned around, walked into my house, and locked the door. The crowd outside cheered. I swear I heard someone shout, "Team Garage Guy," but the real show started an hour later when the contractors pulled up. Karen lost her mind. She blocked the driveway, called the police again, called the HOA president on speakerphone, begging him to stop this illegal construction. He sighed and said, "Karen, it's his property. Move." That's when she screamed, "This is a hostage situation." I couldn't stop laughing. The officers arrived, looked at my deed, looked at her, and said, "Ma'am, this is private property. You need to leave." Every hammer that hit the ground made her angrier. She yelled, cursed, pleaded, even tried to bribe me, offering hundreds, then thousands to stop the fence from going up. When that didn't work, she switched tactics, crying about her poor traumatized car. The neighbors roared with laughter. Someone even live-streamed it under the title, Karen vs. Common Sense Round 3. By sunset, the fence was complete, a solid wall of wood and steel encasing her SUV inside my property. She stood there, mouth open, eyes wide. "You can't do this," she screamed. I handed her a copy of my property deed. "Pretty sure I can." That night, the video hit the internet. Within hours, #GarageGate was trending, and that's when things truly went off the rails. Karen started parading around the neighborhood with a megaphone calling me a garage thief. She made posters that said, "Free my car," and taped them to light poles. The HOA Facebook group was chaos. Half the comments were memes. The other half were people tagging friends like, "This is why I'll never move into an HOA." A few days later, she showed up at my door with a lawyer she'd found online. The man looked like he'd just crawled out of a basement law school. He threatened to file immediate charges for emotional damages. I asked him if he'd passed the bar. He blinked twice and said, "Define passed." He didn't last 10 minutes before driving away. The neighborhood erupted in laughter. At that point, I thought maybe she'd finally stop. But no, Karen doesn't quit when she's losing. She escalates. That night, she came back with a tow truck. The driver took one look at the fence, shook his head, and said, "Ma'am, I'm not touching that. It's private property." She screamed, stomped, waved her arms. He drove off. A few days later, she tried climbing over the fence with a ladder. I'd installed motion lights. The second she touched it, my yard lit up like a football field. She panicked, slipped, and fell flat on her back while the entire neighborhood watched. That clip. It's still my favorite video on the internet. By then, she was an online celebrity. The Garage Bandit, they called her. But she wasn't done embarrassing herself. A week later, she filed an actual lawsuit. She marched into court with a small entourage, her friend Nancy, 2 random neighbors, and what I can only describe as a cousin posing as a paralegal. She gave a tearful speech about how I'd imprisoned her car and ruined her emotional stability. The judge, bless his soul, asked, "Do you have any proof the garage belongs to you?" She froze, then started rambling about community spirit and shared space philosophy. The judge sighed, turned to me, and said, "Your turn." I handed him my deed pictures, text messages, and a flash drive with every viral clip of her tantrums. He watched in silence, rubbing his temples as the footage played: Karen screaming at police, Karen falling off a ladder, Karen waving fake papers. By the end, even the bailiff was laughing. The verdict was short and sweet. Karen had no claim to my property. She had trespassed. I had every right to lock my garage and build my fence. And just to put a bow on it, she owed me damages and court fees. I swear I could have framed that ruling. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. I gave a short statement about respecting private property. Karen, on the other hand, threw herself in front of the cameras crying about corruption and conspiracies. Within a day, her meltdown was viral again. Memes everywhere, talk shows, reaction videos. Even my cousin texted, "Bro, you're on national news." But Karen didn't fade quietly. Oh no. The next morning she was back, megaphone in hand, pacing the sidewalk yelling, "Justice for Karen's SUV and garage guy is a tyrant." Kids from the neighborhood started mocking her, chanting, "My garage now," every time she walked by. She didn't get the hint. Then one night my security camera caught her sneaking around the fence with bolt cutters. 10 seconds later the alarms blared, lights exploded, and she froze like a deer in headlights. The cops came again and gave her a final warning. Any more trespassing and she'd be arrested. By now I'd had enough. I wanted to end it for good. So I made one last move. I talked to my lawyer about abandoned vehicle laws. If a car stays on your private property long enough, unclaimed, unremoved, you can legally take ownership. I filed every form, mailed every notice. 30 days passed. She ignored every one of them. She couldn't admit defeat. At the final hearing, the judge looked at her and said, "You had 30 days to reclaim your vehicle. You did not. Ownership is hereby transferred." Just like that, the SUV was mine. Karen screamed that it was theft, that the system was rigged, but nobody cared anymore. The law was crystal clear. So I decided to give the neighborhood and the internet the perfect ending. I announced an auction. The infamous Karen SUV proceeds go to charity. The turnout was insane. People from across the state showed up laughing, cheering, wanting a piece of history. Reporters covered it live. Karen stood just outside the fence, shrieking about injustice as bids kept climbing. By the end of the day, the car sold for a ridiculous amount, every penny donated to a housing charity. The crowd went wild. Karen collapsed defeated. A week later, the HOA officially banned her from the community. She packed up her house face, hidden under sunglasses, while the neighborhood applauded as her moving truck drove away. And just like that, silence returned. Now every time I pass that fence, I can't help but smile. It's not just a fence anymore, it's a monument. A reminder that boundaries matter, that entitlement has limits. Karen tried to steal my space, my peace, and my rights. All she managed to do was hand me the best story I'll ever tell. Lesson: never mess with someone's garage, especially if that someone has patience, Wi-Fi, and a sense of humor.